Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, but I'm here to do a Dark Shadows video for you guys. Two character retrospectives, Professor Michael Woodard and Sheriff George Patterson. Before I really delve into these two characters from the Dark Shadows revival of Professor Michael Woodard and Sheriff George Patterson, what I really got to get into with the original versus the revival really is the technology, because let's look at this. Let's break this down, shall we? In the original, the first time technology is really used, you sort of got to arc all the way back to the beginning episodes and look at the bleeder valve case. I know some people are going to say the DNA evidence, but no, no, no. The first time we really hear about technology being used in the original is when Constable Jonas Carter does the bleeder valve case, and they get into fingerprint evidence, and David's fingerprints are on the wrench. He handled the wrench twice. So they do. To say the original Dark Shadows didn't touch upon technology would be a very wrong assumption, because they did, and they did use it very well, in my opinion. And how the original handles their use of it, and how they sort of dispose, like, get it out of the way, I've always felt is way better than what the revival did. Now I'll get into that, but the real next time we hear about technology is during the Phoenix arcs. I know some people are going to say, well, the blood work, and yeah, I'll get there. I promise I'm getting to these character retrospectives, but I got to tackle this first. And we sort of hear about Laura's body disappearing, and Roger confirms that the woman at the house, hey, that's my wife, that's my ex. It's about to be, is we know who it really is, but you get what I'm saying. So to sort of get into the DNA evidence to verse in the revival, the original, keep in mind, in the original series, Maggie Evans, yes, is kidnapped. Now, in the revival, there is no Maggie kidnapping. There's no kidnapping at all. But the revival has attacks going on, just like in the original. The big difference to me is, and this is where the revival gets hurt a bit, the original had a lot more going on with its characters than the revival did its characters. And I know that might not be a fair comparison to some, but I got to call a spade here. I got to look at it objectively. I love Dark Shadows to death, and I don't hate the revival. But at the same time, when I look at these two characters of Professor Michael Woodard and Sheriff George Patterson, they're great characters, no question. They're not horrible. But when you do a revival, let's call it a reboot, guys. When you do a reboot, you really need, to me, give yourself more wiggle room to wiggle yourself out of a certain situation. Case in point, okay, I've talked about how Maggie gets kidnapped. All right. Prior to Maggie kidnapping, there's been animals attacked, cow mutilation. My buddy John Philip Betancourt and I were talking about this here just a couple nights ago. When Barnabas shows up, cows start getting mutilated, cattle starts going missing, blood gets drained from cattle, Willie goes missing. Willie Loomis being a thief, Jason McGuire being in town conning Liz, all those are elements to distract what all is going on in Collinsport. Now, are they large elements? They're large enough, is what I'll say. Where in the revival, that's not happening. You don't have there's not enough of a distraction to sort of take the attention away from Barnabas in the revival. And I think that's fair. And to get into Professor Mike Woodard, and Sheriff George Patterson. Now, when Professor Michael Woodard is approached by Sheriff George Patterson, they're talking about the DNA evidence. They're mentioning it. And Professor Michael Woodard does mention Dr. Julia Hoffman. Now, keep in mind, what's similar here is In the original, yes, Sheriff George Patterson knew Dr. Hoffman was a doctor. Some people might say no, that in the original that wasn't the case. No, that's not true. In the original, Sheriff George Patterson knew Dr. Hoffman was at Collinsport, was in Collinwood. Now I'll get into all that. There's a lot to get to with this video. It's going to be very long. So, and to sort of compare that difference, to sort of help with these retrospectives, okay, I've talked about where a bit in this video where, the biggest difference the original has, they had other things going on. And I'm not saying in the revival Dr. Hoffman wasn't interested in Barnabas, but it's made very, you can tell that in the original, Grayson Hall's Julia Hoffman is in love with Barnabas Collins. Anybody can see it, right? So when Dr. Dave Woodard in the original, keep in mind, this is after Willie is shot and laying in the hospital, and Dr. Hoffman wants to kill him, but she doesn't, and Woodard vouches for all she's been helping me. Because remember, Sheriff George Patterson comes in and says, "What are you doing, Dr. Hoffman?" She goes, "Excuse me," and she's sort of dumbfounded. She's not sure she's busted. But what Dave Woodard tells Julia, "Oh, Julia, it's okay. I explained the whole thing." And what he's meaning is, well, number one, he explained the cover story that they ran with. Number two, Dave Woodard, now we don't necessarily hear him say this to Sheriff George Patterson, but this is my interpretation. And this is what the original does so much better with its interpretation than the revival. And I know it feels like I'm dumping on the revival. I'm not. I'll get there, I promise. I'll get to talking about, but I want to give a sort of fair contrast of what I mean by what the original did really right and what the revival sort of, I feel, did wrong, but not. I get sort of why. Again, they're not having a season 2. With the original, even though you don't hear David Woodard say this to George Patterson, he says I told him, he does say, I told him what's going on. I've said the first thing he told about the undercover historical, her being, writing a history of the East Coast families. But I gotta believe Dr. Dave Woodard has told Sheriff Patterson, "Hey, my fellow colleague, she's sort of fallen in love with Barnabas, and I do think she wants to be with him, and she deserves to be happy." I think generally, really, Dave Woodard in her original is happy for Dr. Julia Hoffman. She knows this woman. He knows this woman. Hey, she deserves to be happy. I mean, I'm sure he knows her life's history. And maybe he feels, hey, this woman has dedicated herself to medicine and this and that. She deserves to live a life, I think that's something the original does really, really well. Where sort of the revival is sort of reliant on the original a bit, sort of hoping you just pick up on it. That, yeah, Julia is sort of interested in Barnabas, but she's also interested in curing him. With this, though, and here's where I'll get into the character retrospectives. Professor Michael Woodard is told by Sheriff George Patterson in the revival, and this is plain as day, I have suspected Barnabas Collins of ever since he came into town, because the attack started when he came. This here is where my issue lies with the revival. They're giving themselves almost, and I get it's a risk. They're wanting to show you, though, they're willing to not be afraid of accusing the Collins family, because that is something that the original showed too. That the original Constable Jonas Carter and Sheriff George Patterson both showed they weren't afraid to throw shade at the Collins family. And I get they're wanting to do that in a revival, and part of me understands that and appreciates that. But at the same time, okay, think of the actual accusation here for a second. People are being attacked, drained of their blood. You know what this is. We all know this is a vampire, right? So, and you got to believe that's what they're suspecting. This isn't something where you just say, "Oh, well, there's no such thing." No, 1991. This is where the revival sort of leaves themselves no wiggle room. And I'm not picking on them. I do think it's bold as hell, and it really is. But at the same time, my biggest issue with these two characters is there's times Professor Michael Woodard, okay, I love that he stands his ground when he challenges Ben Cross's Barnabas Collins to stand in front of the window. I love that scene. It's a great scene. Ben Cross, the whole sequence is great. And it's a hell of a scene. Ben Cross is sweating. He's standing there. He looks ill as hell, but he's standing in the sunlight because Dr. Hoffman's treatments are working, right? Here's my issue. Okay, yes, you could say, well, that cements the proof that Barnabas isn't the vampire. Now the sheriff has to go elsewhere. Not really, and here's why. Remember what I said earlier? That Sheriff George Patterson knows Dr. Hoffman's a doctor? Same thing here with the revival. Professor Michael Woodard and Sheriff George Patterson know Julie is a doctor. Right here, I get you sort of wanting a juror of Barnabas's peers to convict him. You want to be able to book an arrest here. But there's also standing on your true convictions and going, I know this is you. I know you're doing this. And you could say, well, that's Professor Michael Woodard's doing. But at the same time, it's not just Professor Michael Woodard who's already made the conviction that he suspects Barnabas. It's the sheriff himself. It's the cop. And if the cop honestly believes that that's the case, if he truly believes, hey, I know you're doing, deep down, I know you're doing this, then where's your conviction here to look at the doctor who you know you've just brought in to help you to suspect her of stabbing you in the back? That's sort of my biggest issue with these two characters. People have always picked on Alexander Isles' character for being dumbed down. This here is sort of taking two characters at once and pulling them so far back, dumbing them down to the point of they don't want to sit there and make a full-fledged accusation at Barnabas simply because of his name. And I just don't find it credible. I don't. The cop, Sheriff Patterson, words out of his own mouth, I suspected Barnabas ever since he came into town. Okay, you've suspected Barnabas. You can say he doesn't say what, but he suspects him of the attacks. And I'll say that's my issue with these two characters is you're basically trying to make Professor Woodard Professor Stokes. That's what this really is. And honestly, I get it, but Woodard is no Stokes. Woodard, first of all, Ben Cross is Barnabas, and I've said this. I love Ben Cross's performance. It's beautiful. But he is so cooler than the other side of the pillow in this role that he outcools Woodard. Like, there's no outcooling Ben Cross as Barnabas Collins in the revival. There just isn't. I swear to God, this was like Ben Cross's unofficial audition for James Bond. It really was. And I love him for it. I really enjoy the hell out of watching Ben Cross in the revival. You want to talk about a character I enjoy watching most? It's Ben Cross's Barnabas. He's a joy to watch, tan and all. He really is. But there's a level that when Stokes spoke in the original, those words spoke volumes. And when he spoke something, Barnabas was often enough times speechless and shocked. He's in a sense, he's not just as cool as Barnabas, he's even cooler and calmer and more collective. Where Professor Michael Woodard, he's not as cool as Ben Cross as Barnabas. He just isn't. And here's a great example, and I love Ben Cross for this line. I appreciate it because he goes, "That, my dear doctor, is Angelique. That's the witch." And he's so cool and calm about it. It's like, damn, This is just like the norm for Barnabas. It feels Barnabas is like I'm used to this by now. I love it. It's a fun watch. The revival really is. It's one of the most fun watch. The original is great to watch, but the revival does bring its own layer of fun. But my biggest issue with back to these two characters, it is just this. Professor Michael Woodard is not cooler than Barnabas, and the way they get rid of him here compared to the way they get rid of him in the original, just I feel it's a bit lazy. I do. I hate to pick on him. I'm not trying to kick him around. Simply because how does this further take shade away from Barnabas? It doesn't. If anything, it throws it right back on him. Because you could say, well, the cop saw him standing in the daylight instead of other people. Sure. But the cop has already suspected Barnabas. I don't feel that when when you turn Professor Michael Woodard into the vampire, no one's going to buy the fact that Michael Woodard has been this vampire the whole time. And I can't believe that that's where they were trying to hint that they were going. I got to believe this was just, let's just turn him into a vampire. It'll be good. That's what it felt like, too. It's like, oh, we're just going to turn him. It's okay. And no, it's not. I sort of wish they would have done something else, found a better way to get rid of him than just turn him into a vampire. This is where I'll always appreciate the original a lot more, because how do they get rid of Dr. Dave Woodard? Well, we're going to inject him and make with a serum that makes him look like he had a heart attack, and Barnabas does the injection, but no one knows. And I love it. It's so well built up and so well done, because there's more with the original. There's more of an emphasis to get Julia's book, right? Again, because Sheriff George Patterson, nobody suspects Barnabas of doing the attacks in the original. They don't know what's going on. And again, I've talked about this. There's other things going on in the original that other people have to focus on. And the fact that, now by the time they do this, obviously, when Maggie comes back, Burke is recast. But at the same time, when you look at a character, two characters, you go, well, was that the best way to get rid of one? I love the way they get rid of Dr. Dave Woodard in the original, because again, there's a lot more going on. Maggie's treatments, Barnabas, Julia at the time is still somewhat treating Barnabas, but after this, their relationship's really going to sour. Barnabas is going to bite Carolyn to revert from being an old man, and I love it. With the revival, my biggest issue is there's nothing else going on to sort of take the heat off of Barnabas. There's no other story that you can look at and go, this is going on, so the cops have to focus on this. Like, there's no Willie Loomis isn't a thief in this. He's not Jason McGuire's henchman. There's no Jason McGuire in the revival, and I do think the lack of character depth does hurt some of the revival's characters, where they're so two characters, one being a professor and one being a cop, are so suspicious of Barnabas, but they do literally, the writers don't do enough to take the shade off of Barnabas. If anything, they put the shade right back on him with Professor Woodard's vampire turn. And I gotta believe you gotta believe the sheriff was gonna look into Barnabas a lot harder. And here's the thing too. Who else knows about Barnabas as a vampire when she comes back? Victoria Winters. Is Victoria Winters going to stay silent or not? And that's the biggest unknown entity of it all. Do I hate Professor Michael Woodard and Sheriff George Patterson in Revival? No, I just feel, from a character retrospective, I get what they were trying to be, first of all. Professor Michael Woodard is sort of a bit of Stokes, a bit of Dave Woodard, more Stokes than Dave Woodard. You know what I mean? They're trying to make this sort of Van Helsing-esque, if you will. But I feel you did this way better with Thayer David's Timothy Elliott Stokes than you did with Professor Michael Woodard, bar none. I don't think there's even a comparison. And I just feel Ben Cross's Barnabas is so cooler than the other side of the pillow. There's no out cooling him here. There's no being cooler than Ben Cross's Barnabas in this revival. There isn't. I love Ben Cross's performance. It's great. I love it to death. I can't not wait to get into the Barnabas character retrospective. That's going to be my most fun one. But now with Sheriff George Patterson in this, do I like how he's matter of fact and he's not afraid? Yes, I love that because even more so because here's what I love about this. I love the fact that again they're sort of going off the original. They're not afraid to throw shade at the Collins family. But again, my biggest issue with the revival is there's nothing to take the shade off, enough of the shade off. Him standing in sunlight, that they both know Julia's a doctor. Where's your accusation at Julia here? I mean, Julia, I get it. Julia Hoffman's reputation is supposed to be huge. I get that. I'm not ignorant to that. But at the same time, they both know she's a doctor. They both know she's been around him. You mean they can't look at her and say, you're doing this, you're helping him? And they both should have been doing that, really. And I feel that's sort of where, because there's nowhere else to go with the revival, they just don't make the conviction. Oh, they need Julia's notes. To me, no, you don't. you don't need Julia's notes here in the revival. In the original, I get why you needed them. In the revival, I feel more, and I'm not trying to pick on them. I feel they're just throwing paint at the wall here and trying to make it stick. And I'm not trying to pick on them. I'm not trying to be mean. I don't want it to come across that I'm being mean. I just don't love the way they did this at times here with these two characters. I love some of it here. I love some of their characteristics. But again, because there's nowhere else to go, and I love Ben Cross's Barnabas. I love how he is. Again, because he's different. He's Ben Cross, and I cannot wait to get into this, does not try to be Jonathan Frid. And I love him for it. You know, most people wouldn't even take that chance or take that risk. But he did. And that's something he does not, in my view, in my opinion, get enough credit for. And I cannot wait to get into his character retrospective, which will be Sunday, guys. I'm going to do that one Sunday. I think, to be fair, though, to these two characters, what did I like about them? The fact that they were investigative. You know, they weren't afraid. Again, everything shouldn't be play it safe by the books, and I do love that. I do love characters who don't pull their punches, and for the most part, they weren't pulling their punches, which I love. But there's a moment they need to follow through, though, too, and they don't. They don't follow through with certain things. Yeah, he goes and gets Julia's. He goes snooping through Julia's stuff. Okay, we've seen that in the original. But where's just where you're just standing your ground, looking at Julia with the cop and going, I know you did this. I know you helped him some way. And telling the cop that too would have been nice too. I think that's something I more would have liked to see. I don't mind. I love characters who aren't afraid to get in your face. Because, hey, I could see that being a real thing. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm being too nitpicky. I'm sure I am. Oh, God. I'm not trying to be too serious about this. That's why I'm laughing. So, do I like these characters? I like them. I'm not in love with these two characters. I do love the shade they throw, but at times there's, again, because the cop, and I want to make a stress of this, Sheriff George Patterson is throwing shade at Barnabas. He says, I suspected Barnabas ever since he arrived at the attacks. And again, this is something where the original wasn't afraid to throw shade at the Collins family. Now, in the original, shade doesn't get thrown on Barnabas for a while, right? For a long, long while. With this, they're not waiting. They're not they don't pull their punch there. But where the places they sort of do somewhat pull their punches, I feel sometimes hurts these two characters. And again, that's just my opinion. If you disagree, please do. I don't want you to think you have to sit here and agree with me. You don't. You don't. God, I don't think I agree with me now. Oh my God. Guys, gals, first of all, before I go, I just want to thank every subscriber that I have, every follower I have on Twitter. I want to thank everybody who has supported this channel. Before I go, before I give my send off here today, um, I want to thank Mark Gilman, John Philip Betancourt, at Dark Shadows Twitter, at Patrick McRae. I want to thank Nancy Kersey, Will McKinley, uh, at Cousin Barnabas, Wallace McBride. I want to thank all the Dark Shadows role players. I can't sit here and name every single one of them, but everyone who's involved in that who supports this channel, and I know they do. I want to thank my buddy Darnell Weeks, Daniel Culver. Um, I want to thank Christian Hanna, who thank you. Everybody who supports my channel, who subscribes, if you watch, thank you. I want to thank, but first, last but not least, obviously, the person who I need to thank most is my lovely wife, Julie, who supports me to death to do this channel, who gives me my love and support, and I love her and my kids most of all. Um, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has been on this channel as a guest, who comes on this channel, who watches it. I don't want you to think that I'm here to crap on anything. I'm not. But there are things that I did not love about the revival. And again, it's just how I feel. I feel they could have did something a little better here with these two characters, and maybe again, I love how they stake somebody in heart, but again, they did that in House of Dark Shadows. So sorry, guys. Oh, big thank you to at Fred Barnabas. Shout out to him. I don't want to miss anybody. I don't want to feel like I'm missing anybody. I just want to thank everybody who. I want to thank at Everyday Horror as well for coming on my channel. Thank you, Ryan Bowers. Thank you to him. And again, I just want to thank everybody who supports this channel, and thank you so much. Um, my next video will be tomorrow night actually. So gonna do Caleb Sayers Collins with Patrick McRae. I'm gonna contact him here. But first of all, thank you everybody. Thank you to everybody who supports this channel. Thank you to Penny Dreadful, um, Danielle. Thank you to two very nice ladies, Kara Tilly's and Christine Pierce, very dedicated Dark Shadows fans. They have a YouTube channel of their own. I'm gonna leave links obviously to YouTube channels and such, and give a bunch of shout outs. Give a shout out to the Collins Sport Historical Society. And again, I just want to thank everybody who watches. I know I'm going on here and this is long. I try to do my best here. I know, look, you don't have to agree with me, certainly. No, I don't want you to feel, oh, I have to agree with. No, you don't. You don't have to agree with me. Certainly not. That's not the case at all. But just thank you from the bottom of my heart to everybody. Thank you very much so.